Okay, this is session 14. I'm Paul Rabideau, and we've in the previous session we talked about what is burnout, and also looked at some Old Testament heroes of the faith who themselves suffered from burnout and how they worked themselves through that. God worked to help them with that. So we're going to talk now about the Apostle Paul and how he stayed resilient. And we're going to take a look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4 mostly, but other passages as well. So 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the first several verses. Therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart. Okay, so this is a phrase that Paul's going to use a couple of times here, at the beginning and at the end. We do not lose heart, which I think describes some aspects of burnout. But by the open statement of truth, we would commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Okay. So, Paul has this phrase that he uses not just in 2 Corinthians, but elsewhere. So I guess this had meaning to him about losing heart or not losing heart. So just think of some of the things that Paul said here, and I've highlighted them. That he says that one of the things he keeps in mind is that God has granted to him, right? He says, God has granted to us this ministry. Okay. Steve, preaching yesterday in Ephesians chapter 3, this idea came out also, is that this is a ministry that God has given to me. And so he keeps that in mind, and that helps him deal with other things. That helps him deal with the difficulties that God has granted this to us, and we have to remember that. So how does Paul think in order to keep himself from burning out, right? And this ministry it involves telling the truth, and preaching the truth, sharing the truth, and we know in this world that there's going to be opposition to the truth, right? And so he also points out in his, let's say, second paragraph here, is that the devil is going to oppose me. Right? In our ministries, we are going to be hindered. So it's not just this is a difficult thing to do. We have an enemy who is actively opposing us. So it's not just a difficult job, though it is one that God gave us, and one, of course, then the devil, he remembers this, is going to work against him. And in the end, this is about God, and it's about His glory. It's not about my glory. So it's not about what I'm getting out of this. So when he starts off by saying here, we do not lose heart, and these are some ways that he thinks that helps him be realistic about the job, be accurate, to think accurately about the job, is God gave me this ministry, and people will oppose me, Satan's going to oppose me, right? But this is about God's glory, and it's not about me. Anyway, right? So this is a way he maybe every morning he woke up and he rehearsed these ideas, and it helps him to not lose heart, not to burn out. Okay, it's hard. The work is hard. Paul elsewhere said, and we have to work hard because it's difficult. the next couple of verses, he says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Okay? So he's being realistic about the work. Okay, but he's saying, but. So I take it here that we can still keep heart. Okay, we can keep our heart and be afflicted and perplexed and persecuted and struck down. But the characteristics of losing heart, we afflicted turns into crushed, and perplexed turns into despair, and persecuted makes us feel forsaken, and being struck down, that we're destroyed. Okay, so there's a difference between keeping heart even under difficulties, but then losing heart. And so these are the realities. We're afflicted and we're persecuted and struck down, and we may be confused by things. That is a reality. But if it goes further than that, being struck down means being destroyed. It's ruined. Everything is ruined, right? That's a strong word. And if we're thinking that way, then we are going to feel pretty awful, right? We'll feel destroyed. But I think Paul is saying here, I'm giving my adversary too much power, right? If this is the impact upon me, and I lose heart, right? That's too much to think. Yes, we're afflicted, but I'm not crushed. I'm confused, but I don't need to despair. Okay? And so he goes on, says, "For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh." Right? So death is at work in us, but life in you. Okay? And so we also speak knowing that he who raised the Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus and bring us with you into his presence. For it is all for your sake, so that as grace extends to more and more people, it may increase thanksgiving to the glory of God. Okay. So more ways that he thinks about this that keeps him from losing heart. So Paul's perspective. So what is Paul's perspective here? What can we say about that?
His focus is on God's glory, and he's realistic about what's happening here, but keeps his mind on what it's achieving. Yeah.
His focus is not on himself. It's on God's glory. It's also on the people, right? This is about God and his glory and what he's doing, and this is about the people too. This is about them, and this is not about me. This is not about me, and that will really help him from losing heart. Okay, so he's realistic about the sacrifices for this particular job, right? Death is at work in me. Okay, so. That's going to be literal, but at some point, but it's metaphorical. He himself is, and his desires have to die, and his perspective is eternal, okay? Not what's going on in this, because he recalls that the Lord Jesus will raise us also with him and bring us into his presence. So there is an eternal perspective here. There's also a perspective of reward in eternity. So it's not about what's happening right now, and especially what's happening right now with me. Right? And that actually keeps his heart up, and so he doesn't lose heart. Right? He maintains his focus on God and the people he's working with, right? Okay. So we do not lose heart. So given all of this thinking, how do we not lose heart? And he shares his thinking with us and his perspective. So we do not lose heart. He summarizes, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. Okay? For this light momentary affliction, so that's what Paul calls his life, shipwrecked, left for dead, and all that stuff, a light affliction, right? But it is a light momentary affliction compared to, okay? This is preparing us, this is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, right? He is keeping his mind on the prize, okay? As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen, right? For the things that are seen are transient. That's true, right? But the things that are unseen are eternal. Okay, so Paul's perspective, right? Again, as he summarized all this, so he does see the trade-off. I'm losing the outer man and the self, right, in this world, but that the trade-off is for the inner man, right, in the unseen world. And that is much more important. So he has the right perspective as to what to value and what not to value. Okay? And it's worth it. And it's worth it. Right? So when we talked about reward and Peter's question and Jesus' answer about 100 times in this life, but also in the next, right? The disciples were evidently able to take that perspective and maintain an eternal perspective. And this is, so Paul is sharing his secrets of how I don't burn out, is I maintain an eternal perspective. Right? Okay. And he has weighed it. He has weighed it out. And he had heard what Jesus had said, and this earthly suffering is more than compensated for, right, by the eternal reward. And Jesus said it was 100 times better, right? And so Paul has sold everything, has sold out in favor of this investment in his eternal future, in his work, and he doesn't care that much as to what is going on here on earth and that so-called value. So as we are burning out, and we have to be careful, okay? I read a book once about burnout, and there was a lot of good information there. Some of it I probably have included here, about how to deal with burnout. But it also really blamed the person, right? And regarded burnout as sin. And there could be issues of sin, right? But I didn't like that it lacked compassion for the person who is going through this, because these are tough jobs. They are tough jobs, and they have all the characteristics. Ministry has all the characteristics that set someone up for burnout. And you have to really keep a focus on what's true, and particularly in an eternal perspective, even while you're suffering right now, right? So we should be compassionate with ourselves and compassionate with others, okay? But as we sense burnout, this an emotional exhaustion and maybe a depersonalization. I'm just always annoyed with the people that I'm supposed to be serving, and that kind of, and I'm annoyed with myself, or I just feel like I'm just a failure. Those are really tough emotions, and as we start to sense that, remember, if we catch it early, then we can intervene and before it's too late, and the consequences are greater. But as we sense, now knowing what burnout is, as we notice it happening to us or maybe to someone else, as we get burned out, we realize, I'm losing perspective here. I'm losing perspective, and how can I adjust my perspective? And it's this a biblical, godly, and eternal thinking that is the antidote to burnout, and try to catch that early. So this is how Paul, a big section in Scripture, Paul talks about that. Okay, so so remember, the idea is that thoughts are creating these feelings and then possibly behaviors, that godliness and holiness and gratitude and a sense of peace come from truth, from dwelling on truth, what's true, and then we can say, I think, that good theology creates good mental health, right? But bad theology creates bad mental health. Do you have a thought?
I was just wanting to be sure I'm clear on the definition of burnout again.
Yeah. So it had that 3 elements, right? And was there one particular one that you're interested in?
Could you summarize what we would say is generally the cause of burnout?
Okay. So there are those 3 ways it might show up. Emotional exhaustion, or depersonalizing others, or myself feeling that I'm a failure. Okay, and these things will happen, right? There'll be situations where I think negatively about someone I'm trying to help, or I just feel like I can't do anymore, or I can't do it anymore, and I'm doing poorly. So there are thoughts behind that. Those are some really difficult feelings, and there are thoughts behind that. But remember, Moses, his thoughts went astray. He was thinking, and so we might be thinking that we're taking too much responsibility for the people we're working with, right? People we are working with, when they learn that you're going to help them, they may just start asking you to do everything for them. And so I have to be aware, and I might want to do, just one more doctor's appointment, but at some point, if I am starting to feel one of these ways, I should stop and think about, well, what am I thinking? What am I assuming here? Am I assuming I have to do everything for this person? And that's a bad thought. That's a bad idea, because then if I do everything, then they don't have to do anything. And then I'm making a mistake in my thinking. In fact, I should be teaching them to take over their life. I mean, they need to take responsibility for their life and not become dependent on me. So I might ask myself, am I taking too much responsibility for this person? Or are they not taking responsibility for solving their own problems? I'm solving, all their problems for them, and maybe I've become codependent in that sense. Okay? In Galatians 6, the first few verses, a couple of interesting ideas that Paul presents, and I think about taking responsibility or not. That we who are spiritual ought to, if somebody has been caught up in sin, okay, or in something, they are caught and they can't deal with it on their own, then we ought to fulfill the law of Christ, the law of love, by helping them, because they're caught. So that's an appropriate place for me to intervene. But then Paul goes on to say, and we're we're bearing one another's burdens when we do that. That's a good thing to do. But then he goes on to say, but that everyone must bear their own burden. Okay, so what is he talking about, right? And he also mentions there that but people bearing their own burdens, it gives them pride in their life, okay, in a good sense, right? If I do everything for somebody, then they lose the opportunity to be proud of what they can accomplish, right? So he's bear one another burden, but the load that they cannot carry themselves. But someone offered this idea that but their backpack, their backpack they have to bring to school or carry around. That's their day. That's what they have to do for themselves today, and they need to be able to carry their own backpack. If I'm walking down the hallway and I'm picking up everybody's backpack for them, I just won't be able to do that. Right? So it is a difficult line to draw and to stay on your side of the line, but I think if you're struggling there, I think you're in the right place. But you just need to be wise. Okay. So, Paul. I think this sort of summarizes Paul, but he goes on and offers these statements elsewhere, not just to the Corinthians, right? So he says, I ask you not to lose heart, right? But be strengthened with power through his Spirit and your inner being. He repeats his themes, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love may know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with the fullness of God, right? Do not lose heart. And he talks about how to think in order to not lose heart, right? Because burnout is about fatigue and weariness and indifference towards others and emptiness. But Paul, in his work, his hard work, can maintain strength in his inner being, because that's what he's focused on. He's grounded himself in the love of Christ and the fullness of God, right? So for him, it's this inner world that gives him strength and his connection with God, and it helps him from burnout, right? Which these three items are part of the definition, different parts of the definition of burnout, right? So don't quit, right? Don't quit. You might need to take care of yourself, but we've seen some characters who, I just want to die. For we hear that some among you, okay, other Christians, I presume, walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busy bodies. Now, such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and earn their own living. As for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. Right? Sometimes, we're not. It's not the rabble; it's our coworkers that can move us towards burnout. So sometimes the behavior of other Christians get us down, and Paul is saying, don't let it get you down. Okay, they don't compare. They may not be doing their job, and they should be doing their job, but don't compare. As for you, do not grow weary in doing good. And he's talked to us already about how to do that. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. We will reap. There will be a reward. The reward will mostly be eternal, but it also will happen right now. We will be rewarded now, in this life, 100 times, in this life and in the next. Right? Jesus said. So, take the long view on reward for our work. Right? So it's perspective. It's how I look at a situation. And that's his final word. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone. Okay. So, so up to this point, I've shared with you just some examples from the Old Testament on really good guys, Moses and Asaph and Elijah, who had really tough jobs, and were naturally, they're human and they were subject to burnout. But there are ways of thinking that will help us. Okay, and we talked about Paul's way of thinking, his perspective. He may have done other things, like he may have taken an Aegean cruise or something like that for a couple weeks and, taken some time off. And the Macedonians financed it or something, and knowing he needed some time off. So I want to talk about my own strategies, but I'd also like to hear just from anybody that just how they themselves deal with burnout in very practical ways. So mostly we've heard some cognitive arguments, like how to think. Okay, I do not lose heart because this is how I think about my job. That's what Paul supplied us there in 2 Corinthians 4 and in other places. Right? This is how I think about it, so that my feelings will be stable and positive. But just some of my own strategies. Again, when it comes to thoughts, just thoughts to help protect me against burnout. I mean, I am subject to this. I have some advantages in how I think, and some things I really try to, but I still need to maintain boundaries. And maybe that's a way of summarizing a lot of other strategies for preventing burnout, is having boundaries in your life. For example, I can't care more than my clients about their problems, right? I can't, if I find myself, so this is, again, is if I find myself doing something that doesn't feel right, I just examine myself. How am I thinking, right? So if I find myself caring more or even doing more for my clients than they are, than them, right? There's something wrong, and this will lead to burnout. Okay, so I have this. One of my colleagues at the mission is the same way. We call this a gift. This gift to sort of detach. So I mean, we may have a session and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of emotion. And then I say goodbye and I go to the next session and the next one, and then I go home. And I don't think about it afterwards. I mean, maybe a thought, maybe a prayer, but I don't get caught up in it. And many people have difficulty with that. But somehow I'm able to detach. Now, when it comes to my family or my church family, I don't detach. And then I might I lose sleep. Okay, so I'm not a completely detached person, but somehow or another in this counseling environment I can detach, and that really helps. Many people have trouble with that, but I can't care more. Do not be over responsible, right? It makes other people under responsible. You could test this out if you wanted to sometime and just start doing stuff for people all the time. And you'll see there'll be, in a short period, the assumption will be that you're going to, make coffee for them every time, or that you're going to bring. We've done enough experimenting on Alan. Let's pick someone else. I don't know. So Aaron, bring Aaron coffee every morning, and eventually he'll stop bringing coffee for himself, and he'll be like, "Where's Katie? Where's my coffee?" Right? And he can bring his own coffee. So. But I cannot become over-responsible for others. I recognize my limitations, or at least, maybe mostly recognize my limitations. And I realize I can't help everybody. I can't help everybody. So even beyond, they have a problem that I'm not experienced or skilled with, and then I just can't. I can't take them. I mean, I may be feeling things about them, but I can't take them. I can't take on a schizophrenic patient unless there's a psychiatrist involved, right? Then I can play some role. But so I can't pretend like, I can talk to him. That's a very bad idea. And there's a whole bunch of serious mental illness that I can't do on my own, and I shouldn't. Or if I'm full, I'm already busy, and somebody contacts me, I have to be realistic, and that is a bit of a struggle for me. But I need to be clear on what my limits are, and I realize I can't help everybody. And I might feel a little badly about that, but I can't feel really badly about that. It's just I can't. I understand my role to be just, a cog. I'm one of those. I'm just a part of the bigger solution. I'm not responsible for this whole person's recovery or their getting well. I'm a piece of the puzzle, or at least I should be a piece of the puzzle. If I'm the whole puzzle, then I think there's a problem. Okay? That there are other people. There's family, there's medical people, there may be other just spiritual people in their lives, and I just have to recognize I'm gonna help. Sometimes I might be the most important person, but usually I'm not, and I can't play that role. I have to be realistic about my role. I am, although that marathon's getting shorter and shorter with each birthday, but I am still running a marathon, right? And I can't be running sprints all the time. And so, marathon runners run, I guess they could probably, their pace would be like my sprint probably. But they pace themselves, right? And they're not sprinting all the time. They wouldn't make it a mile probably and so I have to pace myself and be patient, and because I want to get to the end, and I want to be able to do this as long as I can. And it's one reason why I changed careers, is I want to be able to, I couldn't work at a corporate job late into life, but I think I could do this late into life, but only if I pace myself. I met a guy a month ago who, I don't know how old he was, but let's say he was 45. And he, 10 years ago, burnt out as a pastor. He had been doing it 10 years. And he said, it was 8 or 9 years before I could do anything, any ministry, right? So that's a real loss. That's half of his working life right there. And he just couldn't. So I don't, if I do that, then I'm going to be done in my early 70s, and then I'll, if it takes me, I'll never get back to it. There isn't enough time. I'll never get back to it. So I want to pace myself. And that is a decision you make every week, is pacing yourself. Okay? And I don't assume that I know what is best for someone. Now, I have a personality that I benefit from my personality. I usually feel like I know what's best for me, but I guess I then apply that to them, and they know what's best for them, right? And I don't have to get in there and run their lives. I don't even know I don't know what they should do, but I think they know what they should do, or at least they could if we talk this out, right? So that takes responsibility off of me, and it keeps the responsibility on them for their problems, and that helps a lot. Okay. It's not my job to fix them, but I can help them fix themselves. I think I could do that. But if they're not trying, then I guess they're not ready. And call me when you want to talk again. Okay. I think that, or to the extent that I think that, right? God is working with all 7 or 8 billion people in this world, That's not too much for him, right? God is working with every single person, right? And I want to find out what that is, okay, what it is that God's doing in their life. And I want to get on board with that. Okay? So this is one reason I have to listen. Okay, I have to listen to them and listen for, well, what is God doing in their lives? And if I can get on board with that, I think that we can be more successful here. I'm pretty good at not comparing myself to others, either good or bad. But if I notice, at least sometimes when I do that, and I just try to stop that right now, right? I'm not supposed to be like them, and I don't have to think negatively about them. There's no point. That's their issue. And throughout my life, my working life, well, look, also, I don't usually worry too much about what others think. If I do, I try to stop that. Although I'm interested in input. So, then this last point has helped me throughout my whole working life, is remembering who my boss is. Okay? So sometimes I've had great bosses, and sometimes I've had bosses that aren't great, or aren't even good, right? But just remembering who my boss is, and that's the Lord Jesus, and just doing all things heartily unto him. And I may not be able to please this person who's my boss, but I think I can please Jesus. I can please him. He's a good boss. And just remembering that he is really my boss. And that has helped me many, many times. Okay. And so I have to also beware of what am I good at, what am I not good at, and try to improve on some of these things. And I am a P. Remember, I'm a P. I like spontaneity. I'm comfortable with things being open, But if you're a counselor, or you're going to be in ministry, you can't just wake up Monday morning and say, okay, who am I going to see today? Because if you haven't planned something, you're likely not to be able to accomplish that much. But here is something that I've learned since I've been, in this role, and that is, I can be organized. Right? I can schedule 25 appointments a week, okay, which is is something like what I do every week. But I can do it, but it's exhausting. Okay, so it's not that I can't do it. It's that it really takes a lot of energy, and INTPs or intuitive people, they don't like to expend energy. So I conserve energy, but I have this task that requires a lot of energy, and so it's unpleasant, and I'm likely to make mistakes because it's difficult for me. But I don't make mistakes because I really pay a lot of attention to it, but it's exhausting. And so what has happened is God has stepped in and helped me with this. And it's just one of the most remarkable things that has ever happened to me, is that I've figured out that there's a lot of people, really with everybody, I should just establish a schedule and leave it up to them to remember to come to see me, right? Of course. But I used to send reminders. And then what people learn is, well, if I didn't get a reminder, I guess we don't have an appointment. Right? And sometimes I forget to send a reminder. So now I'm responsible for, that was really heavy for me. And then one time I accidentally sent, instead of blind copying, I sent everybody's. That was a big mistake. And nobody complained, but I don't know. That was a big mistake. So I just leave it up to them. We meet every other week on this day at this hour, right? And you come, and that's part of you learning to be responsible, which often could be a client's issue. And so I've learned other things just to take the burden off of me. But even so, there's still a lot to do each week. New people or people I see only occasionally. But God has sort of stepped in, and if I can basically get it laid out for the week, then I know I can start today, and I've already done my job, fulfilled my responsibilities, and then the client has to do their part. That's good, right? I have my part, they have their part. It's divided up in a way that makes sense, and then maybe at 10 o'clock someone doesn't show up, or they call and they say, I'm not feeling well, I cancel. So I know what that means. That means that time is needed for something else. And then I discover my 8:30 appointment, which was going to be 90 minutes anyway, they really needed more time. They really needed more time. And so now I have it. Okay, I didn't know that was going to happen, but now they have it. Or someone calls and said, can I see you today? And I said, yeah, at 10 o'clock. Okay? Or I needed the time. Okay? And this happens every single day. And when I figured out what was going on, then it just delights me, because God is participating in my scheduling. So he's taking over the worst part of my job. To some extent. I'll do some. And so I don't chase people around. And if I find I have a free hour, I don't look for somebody to fill it, because I know God has an idea, and it's going to be needed for what he knows, right? And sometimes, and not usually, but sometimes I need that hour. Okay? So I'm not good at that, but at the thing that I am least good at, God has stepped in and helped me. He is my helper, right? I'm not good at living in the present. I have probably planned every day of my life, although I do like spontaneity too, right? But living in the moment is hard for me, because I was thinking about tomorrow and getting it ready so it will go better. And then you could do that, and you can miss every day of your life. That's a risk. So just enjoying the moment. We have a few more minutes with this session, and just enjoy it, right? Creating boundaries is really important. There's an excellent book called Boundaries. You should read that sometime, and maybe read it with somebody else. I've done that a number of times, and for some people, it's just help them and completely address their issue, because now they're dividing their lives up appropriately instead of just being absorbed into other people or just out of control. Listening to my body and what it's saying to me, that first day last week. A week before, when I was home, and I did like an hour and a half with the seniors group, and I didn't take any time to sit down or anything. I mean, I was wiped. You got to remember, when I go to DITP, sit down between sessions, and then listen to what I'm feeling. If I'm upset, listen to that. Exercise. Don't eat too many sweets. But here's the most important thing I do, and is I got to make time for recreation. And what I do mostly for recreation is gardening, and there's a reason for that. I find it interesting, and I like the results, although sometimes they're terrible. But when I need to, if not every week, then very often, on let's say a Saturday, just go out in the yard. I have a pretty big backyard. Go out in the yard, and my day, my normal days are very highly scheduled, right? And we got to make the most of the time. And I just sit in this big chair all day long, right? Which they say is as bad as smoking, right? And so on my day off, I go out in the backyard, and sometimes I need to plan, this has got to get done, but the best experience is just randomly, I look up, I see something there, like, okay, I'll do that. Then I look up, and I'm walking back and forth. It's random, okay, it's not scheduled. I'm wasting a lot of time sometimes, and I physically exhaust myself. And that's a good day. And I feel recreated, right? Because that is exactly the opposite of my work day, right? And so you have to find something that you can get away to and refresh yourself. And you have to do it regularly. Right? And my yard should look a lot better for all the effort I put into it. And I'm big on perennials, so I can just maybe do it once, and I have to do it every year. But the process is much more important. I mean, I don't really even care what it looks like. The process is much more important than the result, right? Okay. So you have to find something like that. I mean, it doesn't have, to be gardening, right? So I just want to make a comment. There was a burnout inventory. Look at that, and we could talk about that. Maybe we'll talk about that our very last session this week. Okay, I think that would be a good idea. And talk about that, or we could talk about it individually. And the burnout assessment has two aspects. One is the negative things, okay, but then there's a prevention assessment. How much am I doing to prevent burnout? Because you can, and building resiliency, these protective factors. So what are the positive protective factors? What are the negative threats? So it asks questions about both. You don't need to score this. It's not that scientific, right? So what we're going to do when we return after our break is talk about depression. Okay? Thanks.